Japan has become the fifth country to put a spacecraft on the moon, but power issues are threatening to cut the mission short. Japan's smart lander for investigating moon, known as SLIM, landed at 12:20 a.m. local time, but the probe's solar panels were not able to generate electricity. That's according to the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. Hitoshi Kuninaka is the head of the agency's research center.
And since we are not able to generate electricity, and so the operation is being done using batteries on load.
Kuninaka said the lander's solar panels might be at the wrong angle, but JAXA is hoping a shift in sunlight can help restore its functions. That takes 30 days on the moon, Kuninaka said. Dubbed the Moon Sniper, SLIM attempted to land within 100 meters or 328 feet of its target, versus the conventional accuracy of several kilometers. JAXA says the technology will become a powerful tool in future exploration of hilly moon poles, seen as a potential source of oxygen, fuel, and water. It will take up to a month to verify whether SLIM achieved its high-precision goals, JAXA said. Japan is increasingly looking to play a bigger role in space exploration, partnering with the U.S. to counter China. The country is home to several private sector space startups, and JAXA aims to send an astronaut to the moon with NASA's Artemis program in the next few years. But there have been recent setbacks in rocket development, including a launch failure of its new flagship H-3 rocket last March. Only 4 nations, the former Soviet Union, the U.S., China, and recently India, and no private company have achieved a soft landing on the moon's surface. The United States was the first country to put man on the moon in 1969, and to this day is still the only nation to have landed people on the moon. In 1959, the Soviet Union beat the U.S. to become the first nation to reach the surface of the moon with its Luna 2 spacecraft. This all happened during the peak of the Cold War.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Spacecraft sent to the moon are typically categorized into several mission types. A flyby mission passes close to the moon, but does not go into orbit around the moon. Think of it as an initial reconnaissance mission. An orbiter mission allows the spacecraft to go around the moon, continually taking detailed photos or radar images of it. A hard landing mission is where a probe crashes into the moon. Those can be intentional, with the impact kicking up debris that can then be analyzed, often by the instruments of an orbiter spacecraft, or unintentional, when an attempted soft landing goes awry. Soft landings are typically the most challenging and costly missions, as the spacecraft must make it to the surface of the moon with its structure and instruments fully intact. Since the late 1960s, there's been over 20 successful soft landings on the moon. 6 of those were NASA's manned Apollo missions, and globally, more than 100 lunar missions are expected to take place by 2030. A major reason for this renewed interest in going back to the moon was finding concrete evidence of a valuable natural resource: water. For years following the Apollo missions, scientists had seen clues of water on the moon, but it wasn't until India's Chandrayaan-1 mission, which sent an orbiter and impactor to the moon in 2008, that researchers became confident that the moon was not as dry as they originally thought.
The altitude is being brought down from 800 meters, and we are nearing and approaching the lunar surface.
In August of 2023, India made another breakthrough, becoming the first nation to successfully soft land on the moon's south pole, an area that scientists think is the most likely to contain large reserves of water. Earlier that month, a Russian probe en route to soft land in the same area crashed into the moon after it spun into an uncontrolled orbit. Aside from being crucial for human survival, water can be used to make rocket fuel by splitting its components, oxygen and hydrogen, and liquefying them. When these two elements are brought back together, the chemical reaction results in a burst of energy that can be used to propel a rocket. NASA is using this fuel type in its new SLS rocket that will launch astronauts back to the moon. With access to water, the moon could one day become a refueling station for rockets and a springboard for deeper space exploration. Private companies and countries are also eager to mine the moon for rare earth metals. And then there's the isotope helium-3, which, while rare on Earth, is abundant on the moon and can theoretically be used to power nuclear fusion reactors. The presence of water on the moon and access to its other resources have motivated a number of nations and commercial companies to explore it. In the last few years, Japan, South Korea, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and India have all sent spacecraft to the moon, with varying degrees of success. Most recently, Japan became just the fifth nation to soft land a spacecraft on the moon. On the heels of its own successful unmanned moon landing, India has also said that it plans to put an astronaut on the moon by 2040. Russia too has expressed a desire to put astronauts, known as cosmonauts in Russian, on the moon between 2031 and 2040, according to state-owned media. But the biggest competition is between the United States and China, and who can set up a presence on the moon first. The U.S. effort to return to the moon is known as Artemis. The program is spearheaded by NASA in conjunction with a number of commercial and international partners, and is expected to cost the country over $93 billion through 2025. As has become the norm, NASA is working with a number of commercial partners to build out its Artemis infrastructure. Some of these companies include Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Aerojet Rocketdyne, Northrop Grumman, Blue Origin, SpaceX, Axiom Space, and Collins Aerospace. NASA's first mission, Artemis 1, took place in 2022 and tested NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft, which will eventually carry astronauts to lunar orbit. More recently, NASA, in partnership with commercial company Astrobotic, launched the country's first lunar lander in decades, though it suffered a technical anomaly shortly after launch. The Artemis 2 mission, which was originally scheduled for November 2024 but has since been pushed back to September 2025, will launch 4 astronauts into orbit around the moon before Artemis 3 returns astronauts to the moon's surface in September 2026. As part of its Artemis objectives, NASA is working to build a space station that will orbit the moon as well as establish a base camp on the moon's surface. Meanwhile, China is a relative newcomer to the space race, with the country not having conducted a manned spaceflight until 2003. But China has since made tremendous progress. The country built its own Earth orbiting station after Congress banned all scientific collaboration between NASA and China in 2011, meaning China lost access to the International Space Station. Along with a number of partners including Russia, Venezuela, and Pakistan, China has also announced plans to build its own research station on the lunar surface, and has said it wants to put astronauts on the moon by around 2030.